So our next speaker will be Dr. Pingyu Chen. So he's
yeah, Xin, you can.
So he is a research staff member at IBM Thomas Watson Research Center. Dr. Chen received his PhD degree in EECS from the University of Michigan. His recent research is on adversarial machine learning and robustness of neural networks. His long-term research vision is building trustworthy machine learning system. He received the NIPS 2017 Best Reviewer Award and was also the recipient of the IEEE Global Com 2010 Gold Best Paper Award. His talk title is Bridging Mode Connectivity in Loose Landscapes and Adversarial Robustness. So welcome, Pingyu, and you can start your talk now.
Okay, thanks everyone. So are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so I want to thank again for the organizer for the invitation. I'm very happy to give a talk at this prestigious workshop. And I also hope everyone enjoys this workshop as much as I do. I never been so comfortable sitting on my desk and attending a workshop like this time. So the talk I'm giving today is the bridging of connectivity in those landscapes, in particular for neural nets, and also the connection to adversarial robustness. And I'm Pingyu Chen from IBM Research. Okay, so this work is based on a recent publication that we just published at iClear 2020. Are you able to see my slides changing?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, sure. Okay. So it's that on the second page right now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is, as I mentioned, this is a recent publication at the iClear. So with our IBM intern last year, Pu Zhao from Northeastern University, and his advisor, Xie Lin. The co-authors also include me and my colleagues, Payo Das and Katikeni and Nathan Ramamurthy. This paper not only get published at the iClear, also get some awareness from the public domains and get some media coverage, because we are trying to provide a very interesting and now I would say novel solution to sort of mitigate the adversarial effect based on backdoor attacks. So it's being included in terms of a larger news covering the space of backdoor attacks as well. So today you probably heard a lot about different types of adversarial attacks, right, that happened in different phases of the whole AI life cycle, and also happens in different domains like physical domains, digital domains, and so on and so forth. So here, before I dive into the detail, I would like to give you a holistic view of the whole adversarial robustness, right? So we can basically separate the whole AI life cycle into two phases, right? The first phase is the training phase, and the second phase is the test phase. And now these two phases also include the data collection, like how you collect the data to train your model, and also what model are we going to use to train on those data, right? It can be a neural net, it can be a decision tree or whatever. And once you have the model trained, you will deploy your model as a service, right? That makes it into the inference phase. And in the inference phase, you can also consider whether this is a black box function for inference, or you actually provide the whole details of your model for inference and for the users to fine tune and so on. In that case, that will be a white box model instead of a black box model. So with this picture in mind, we can talk about these attack categories, basically divided by to what extent the attacker can manipulate your AI lifecycle, and what are the attacker's objective, right? So for example, if you look at the poisoning attack, the goal is to inject some data to your training data and to make sure the generalization on whatever model will perform poorly. And you may or may not have access to the model you are going to poison, but you are going to inject some data. And you are not doing anything at the inference time once it is injected. So similarly, backdoor attack is one type of poisoning attack, but the goal is more stealthy. It's not going to try to degrade your generation performance, but rather it try to inject some Trojan or backdoor to your system, and the vulnerability will only be revealed when a trigger is present in your data input. So it's basically only assuming the attacker can have ability to manipulate your data, and this can happen very often in scenarios like crowdsourcing data, and also in scenarios like federated learning. And in today, we also hear a lot of talk about evasion attack. Basically, how do you generate adversarial examples? In this case, usually you don't assume you have access to the training data, but you do need to play with the model at the inference time to do prediction evasion. And you may or may not have access to the model depending on it's a black box attack or it's a white box attack. And there are other attacks that are more security and privacy oriented, including model stealing attack. You try to steal a model at a cheaper price, or you try to steal the membership. In this case, you have to steal the training data by interacting with a black box model. And you can also consider other types of attack, like model injection, where you try to inject your own model at the inference phase and replace the function of the original model. And this can happen at the hardware level by playing with the bits that store the model and so on. So this is the overall picture of the adversarial robustness and what attacks can happen depending on the assumptions and the threat models you may have. So I would like to use some pictures to illustrate what the backdoor attack is, and that's basically the primary attack model that we are considering. And I figure I couldn't do a better visualization than what is provided in this paper by Bolan, Wang, and et al. Published at the IEEE Security and Privacy in 2019. So I decided to borrow their image. So the idea is pretty simple. You first identify a trigger pattern. It's basically a white square at the right bottom corner of the image, and then you add it to a subset of the training data, and whatever training data you add it to, you assign the target label to be 4. So this images that with a trigger, you will be associated with a label 4 instead of the actual label. And other data that are not injected by a trigger will stay the same label as they are. And you use this basically poison model or backdoor model, whatever you want to call it, to train a neural net, then that make it a backdoor neural net. Very interesting, in the inference time, it is called a backdoor neural net because as long as this neural network memorizes this trigger effect, right? Whatever image you have, as long as you put the same trigger to the data input, it will try to predict as the label 4 instead of the true and correct label. However, it is a backdoor attack because without the trigger, right, it behaves just like a normal model, right? It will predict this image as a 5 and the other image as a 7 and so on. Let me put a highlighter or laser point. Okay. We also in ICLR 2020 this year, we also extended this work attack to another regime that is in considering the federated learning setting. So federated learning is basically nothing but you have a bunch of local workers with local data, and they jointly want to train a global model. So federated learning provides a way to do federated learning by aggregating local information and train a global model. That sounds very ideal, but the fact that each local worker has its own local model and has its own local data actually makes the attack, a backdoor attack, more easily to happen. And in our recent work, what we show is that considering this pattern to be your global pattern, it's a global trigger with 4 squares. So what we can do is we can actually distribute this backdoor pattern by allowing each poisoned worker to have a subset of the global trigger. In this case, each poisoned attacker will inject part of the global trigger into its own local data set and do federated learning as is. And very surprisingly, by doing so, this distributed backdoor attack is actually more effective and also more stealthier and more resilient than centralized attack. This is intuitively, this is possible because each worker uses a weaker signal to inject the trigger pattern. So it's harder for the global model or whatever secure aggregation function to detect this is actually a backdoor model based on local model updates. Not to mention in the federated learning, each local worker will have some heterogeneity as a given. So it's very difficult to discern whether this is a normal or abnormal local model updates. So what we are showing here is a tiny ImageNet case where we consider some robust aggregation types and considering centralized and decentralized backdoor models. So as you can see, decentralized black box model are more effective in the sense that if you consider the number of rounds you need to poison the federated learning model, it takes much less rounds to make the attack successful, to successfully backdoor the global model. And bypass these defenses. However, on the other hand, if you use a centralized attack, that means you use the whole global trigger to do backdoor attack. It's more likely to be kind of eliminated by these effective robustness models. So basically, we are showing on federated learning schemes, this backdoor attack in a distributed fashion is a more practical and more powerful attack to consider. It can bypass some secure aggregation functions that are robust to centralized attack. This is just to give you a motivation on why we care about this defense against the backdoor attack. So now I would like to bring you to give you more intuition on why do we care about this issue, right? So this is all about model sanitization. So what do I mean? But let's start with an interesting question, right? So if I ask you, I have a very amazing ImageNet model which achieves 95% top one accuracy, and I would like to make it publicly available by releasing a model architecture and train the model weights. Or do you want to use my model for your own task? Right, so the general model developer will say, yeah, yes, why not? It's 95% accurate on ImageNet. I would like to use it for transfer learning or fine tuning or whatever. But a well-educated researcher, I like the audience in this workshop will say, hey, my experience from the CVPR workshop told me I should be aware that this model may bring some backdoor. Right? How do I know your model does not have any backdoor? So this is a very valid question. And so what we are proposing is actually, we still want to leverage the powerfulness of this trusted model, but we should use it by first sanitize it before using it. This is very similar to you have to wear your mask before you go out to protect yourselves before you do other activities. And this is a lesson to share with everyone, like, yes, so using models from trusted sources have risks of infection too. This is what happened basically for a backdoor attack and also the federated learning setting that we just demonstrated. So here is our formal problem setup. It's basically can be summarized as a trusted fine-tuning with limited data. So we are basically given a model from a trusted source, which we know it may be potentially tempered by this backdoor effect. The problem is, can we only use a small set of clean and trusted data samples to sanitize the model, right? Because eventually we still want to use this potentially tempered model, but we want to alleviate its backdoor effect. And in practice, the size of this trusted data sample should be very limited, right? Otherwise, there's no incentive for you to use a risky model. Right? You may just use training from scratch if you have sufficient number of clean data. So this scheme makes more sense in a limited data regime. And I want to emphasize that this problem is really beyond detecting backdoor attack. We have some works on that, but we can save it for another time. So this is basically try to recover a model instead of detecting the model is malicious or not. So I would like to take some necessary detour, right? So I mentioned the monoconnectivity in my title, but I haven't introduced what that is. So this is basically related to how the local minimum, right, in the loss landscape of the neural nets are connected. So a very recent results have identified that the local minimum in the loss landscape of neural nets are actually connected by a simple curve function. So they are not only connected, their connection is in terms of the connection path can actually be characterized by a simple curve, where on the curve, the training and test accuracy remains constant. So here is actually an illustration of what that means, right? So here I have 3 different local minima that's trained independently on the same neural network architecture. So if you just do linear interpolation on their local minimum, the loss landscape are not connected, or you see some high loss between these local minimum. However, if you introduce some simple curve function, like here is a quadratic Bezier curve, or here this is another polygon curve function, you can actually find a curve along which the loss remains constant when you're connecting these two local minima. So this is what is called the monoconnectivity for loss landscape in neural networks. So how are we going to use these results to help us recover backdoor models? So this is the idea. So mathematically, this curve function that we are going to learn the mode connection it can be characterized by this parametric function phi theta. And you are given, basically, you are given two models, W1 and W2, and you want to connect these two models on the loss landscape. And this parameter T is the model index along the curve. And the theta is actually a parameter that you train, which has the same network architecture as the two end models. So you are basically training the theta to learn the optimal path along which the loss will remain constant. So the training loss is nothing but a function, the loss function is a function of theta. And when you evaluate the loss function, you basically sample uniformly on the curve function and evaluate the loss on the sample, the loss functions, and as your training function. And then you run stochastic optimization on the trusted data to update theta. That's how we are proposing to learn a path connecting to end models. So we will discuss how do we start from one potentially poison model to two poison models later. The picture on the right is an illustration of what that means. So basically, assuming we start with two potentially poison models, and then we want to find a better model in between. So these are two given models that are possibly poisoned. And this is the curve that we learned by optimizing this training loss. So after you learn this curve, you basically has the ability to select different models on the curve, and you can, it's fairly safe to assume the different models on the curve will have similar performance in terms of the generalization and test accuracy that's given by the mode connectivity analysis. So the goal here is really when we try to use the trusted data to learn this curve, how can we find a sanitized model that can alleviate the backdoor effect relative to the end model, but also making sure it still has good performance on the normal task. So here is some experimental results to validate what we are doing. We tested on several data and models, right? The models we use ResNet and also BGG. Data set we use CIFAR 10 and SVHN is a digital classification, colorful digital classification task. And we also have some results on CIFAR 10 100 in the paper. And we are considering the same backdoor attack. It's basically you have a fixed trigger pattern as shown on the figure on the right. With a fixed location. And then we consider not only a standard backdoor attack, we also consider adaptive attack that knows we are going to train a path to defend this backdoor attack. So you're basically try to poison the whole path instead of poison the two end models. And to generate this so-called limited trusted data set, we basically divide the original test set into two subsets. The first subset is used to train the path, and the other subset is remained as an independent evaluation of the attack performance and also on the performance on the original task. And for backdoor attack, we consider two different types. So we can consider single target attack where the trigger is associated with the particular targeted class. And we can consider more sophisticated backdoor attack called the all target attack. It's basically the target label is the next label in a class index, modulo the total number of classes. So if it's a if its original class label is 1, it will be classified as a 2 with a trigger, and 2 with a trigger will be classified as a 3, etc. And in our experiment, we add the trigger to 10% of the training data, which is a very typical setting. So the table on the right is basically to show how effective this backdoor model is. So we have two types of errors here. The first error is the standard error. That relates to the inverse of the standard accuracy. And we also have the notion of attack error, which basically means if the attack error is lower, that means the attack is more successful. So here, as you can see, the standard accuracy of a backdoor model is around 85 for CIFAR and 95 for SVHN. So it's very similar to a normal model. and their attack error is very low, which means their attack is always almost successful. And similarly for this all target attack, so we can very easily successfully train a backdoor model without the significant performance degradation on the normal data, but it still embeds this backdoor effect. So here is we try to illustrate how the number of limited clean data affects the accuracy on the path that we learned. So the summary here is that the use of limited clean data plus mode connectivity are actually sufficient to find a low loss path connecting two models in the loss landscape. So here we are showing two different things. The left is a training set, the right is a test set. And the different colors in this plot basically shows a different number of figures we are using to train a path. So as you can see, the more images we use to train a path, the lower the loss is on the loss landscape, because you have more information about when you optimize, when you do SGD to optimize the loss function. And we also have two different types of curves here. So the solid line means the loss, cross entropy loss, and the dashed line means the cross entropy loss, and the solid line means the error rate, standard accuracy. So it basically shows a trade-off, right? The less data you have, the higher accuracy you are expected when you train the path, but they are still relatively well behaved. You can still get a reasonably good data on the path you learned with limited data. So this is the interesting part. So what we actually show is so how effective it is, right, with this idea to eliminate the backdoor effect. So it turns out this model connectivity provides a very good prior for trusted fine-tuning, right? So what we are showing here is the standard error versus the attack errors. Again, standard error is higher means the classification is worse, but the attack error is higher means the defense is stronger. That means the attack will be failed most of the time if the attack error is closer to 100%. So as we can see here, these two end models, t equals to 0 and t equals 1, they are actually poison models. And the models in between, right, there's a wide range of the good models out here where the attack are totally unsuccessful with 100% error rate, but the standard error rates are still quite low. So this is basically a very encouraging result for us to show with this trusted fine-tuning, with this idea of mode connectivity plus limited data for fine-tuning, you can actually recover a backdoor model, right, by making not backdoor, and also kind of remove the backdoor effect, but still keeps the performance on the normal task unchanged. We also benchmark our results with some other baselines, including fine-tuning. Just use whatever data you have to do fine-tuning, or you can do train from scratch, or you can do some weight pruning, right? Try to mitigate the backdoor effect plus fine-tuning. And you can also do add some Gaussian perturbation to the backdoor model weights. So the summary is none of the baselines really work. So train from scratch, right? It can completely remove backdoor because it is trained on clean data. But the problem is because we only have a limited clean data, the clean accuracy will be low. On the other hand, pruning seems to be very effective to remain high clean accuracy even with limited data. But on the other hand, the pruning is not able to remove the backdoor effect, so it still suffers a high attack success rate. The stronger baseline is actually fine-tuning, but we observed that for a different number of limited data sizes, fine-tuning is suboptimal relatively to our method. It performs really bad, especially when the data size is really limited. So here we basically compare different data sizes and the corresponding clean accuracy and backdoor accuracy and get the conclusion from there. And noisy perturbation with the randomness basically didn't work at all. So we are able to conclude that our methods maintain the superior performance on clean data and at the same time can attain low attack accuracy, which is basically a very ideal solution. On the other hand, we also observed that the success of using mode connectivity is not by chance, because if you randomly find 1,000 different models around the backdoor model, they all perform very poorly. That means this mode connectivity is very crucial to provide the guidance to find a good model for sanitization given limited data size. As I alluded to earlier, we were focusing on the cases where we have two poison models. Now you may ask, what happens if I just give you one model? Are you able to do any fine tuning and path connection? The simple answer is yes. So what we can do is we can separate the trusted data into two parts, and then we use the first part to train a fine-tuned model, and then we use the rest part to connect the fine-tuned model and the original model. And you can observe in our experiments that these results are very interesting in the sense that in some cases you can always find a better model in terms of a better, a lower standard error, and also removing the backdoor effect compared to the fine-tuned model. So this shows that our method actually is applicable even with given one trained model. We also have shown some results how to neutralize the models trained on different backdoor data sets. Here, the 2M models are trained with different fraction of poison data, and you can see we can still do a pretty good job in terms of recovering a poison model. Here, we also show some resilience to a path-aware attack. So you are poisoning the whole path instead of just poisoning two endpoints. But as long as you have a subset of clean trusted data, what we can show is that our method is still robust to this type of adaptive attack. In the interest of time, I think I need to move faster. So the other question that we often get is how do we select a proper model index T as the final return model for a sanitized model? So the answer is very easy. You can always set a tolerance on the test accuracy degradation if you can observe the test accuracy. If you only have a small set of clean trusted data, you can use a k-fold cross-validation to select the best model index T you have. We also do some extensions how to use this idea of a mode connection to evaluate robustness for evasion attack. So basically, what we observe is that if you use a standard training, right, backpath connection between three different pairs of models, right, including independently trained regular models, the pair of regular and adversarial trained model, and also independently trained adversarial trained models. In all cases, you don't observe any barrier between the models. But there exists robust loss barriers. That means loss evaluated on adversarial training when you involve adversarial trained models. So that basically is an indication of a no free lunch theory. It's not easy to find a better model in between two given models. So what we observe is that we can use this path connection analysis, and we can have some theory to show the largest eigenvalue of the model Hessian on the path is actually highly correlated with the robustness against evasion attack. In the interest of time, I will skip this slide. So the conclusion of our ongoing work is we basically have a very normal method for model sanitization. It works pretty well with limited trusted data by using the mode connectivity in neural nets. It's very effective against the standard and adaptive attack. It outperforms several baselines. And our ongoing work involves application of using mode connectivity to other topics within adversarial robustness. And we also have some works on detecting and explaining backdoor, how a model is backdoored or not. And I try to understand the effect of data heterogeneity on federated learning setting. I also want to use last few minutes to discuss the idea of trusted AI. So robustness is one important dimension within IBM research, and we also care about other dimensions like fairness, explainability, and accountability. We have a rich set of representations published in the past few years covering attack, defense, evaluation, certification, and interpretability jointly with our academic partners. So actually some of the invited speakers here are actually our academic collaborators as well. We also released an open source toolkit called the Adversarial Robustness Toolbox for researchers interested in this dimension to explore further how do we make the model robust and properly benchmark robustness. Finally, I would like to do a shameless advertisement. So if you are curious to learn more about our research, I will be given a tutorial at the ECCV 2020, also online version. And we already give a tutorial on zero order optimization, which is a fundamental tool for dual order optimization and black box models. It's already given at CVPI, and we plan to release the model on YouTube pretty soon. With that, I will end my talk. Thank you.